She drops to her knees on the court in Washington, D.C. Both hands fly up to cover her face. And then she just screams into her palms, this raw sound of relief that has clearly been building for months. 14 months earlier, on a different court in Miami, that exact same young woman walked off in total silence. Beaten. Unnoticed. Ranked outside the top 100. A name almost nobody in America could even pronounce. Same opponent, same sport, same country hosting both her heartbreak and her miracle. So what happened in between those two moments? Her name is Alex Eala. And if you have never heard it before today, you are about to find out why an entire nation just watched a 21-year-old collapse into tears on American soil. And why the woman she just beat, a top 3 player on the planet, stood at that trophy ceremony afterward and admitted something champions almost never say out loud. But let us slow down for a second. Because to really understand why grown adults were crying in the stands of a tennis stadium in Washington, D.C., you need to understand what it cost to get there. You need to understand the 14-month gap between 2 matches against the exact same rival. One match nobody remembers. One match nobody will ever forget. Here is the strange part. The Alex Eala who lost in Miami and the Alex Eala who just made history in Washington look, on paper, like the exact same player. Same coaching team. Same left-handed forehand that gives everyone trouble. Same quiet, almost eerie calm on changeovers. So what actually changed? Was it her game? Was it something mental? Or was it something that happened far away from any camera, something nobody was paying attention to at the time? Stay with me here, because by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly what separated the version of her that walked away in silence from the version that could not stop crying in front of millions of people watching live. For now, here is all you need to know. 14 months ago, she lost to Jessica Pegula across 3 brutal sets, and almost nobody outside a small circle of hardcore tennis fans even noticed. To understand what rebuilt her into who she is today, we actually have to go back further than Miami. All the way back to a 13-year-old girl who left home with nothing but a suitcase and a dream that almost nobody around her believed in. Let us start where this story actually begins. Not in Washington, not even in Miami. It begins on a small island nation of 118 million people, a country that loves basketball, loves boxing, and had never once in its entire history produced a woman ranked in the top 30 of world tennis. Not once, not ever. That is the weight Alex Eala carries every time she steps onto a court. She is not just playing for herself out there. She is playing as the first of something. And being first means there is no map to follow. No older sister on tour who already walked this exact road and can tell you what is coming. No blueprint for how a kid from the Philippines is supposed to break into a sport run by European academies, American college programs, and Grand Slam nations sitting on decades of infrastructure. So at 13 years old, Alex Eala did something most of us can barely picture. She left home. She packed a suitcase and moved across the entire world to Spain, to train at Rafael Nadal's own academy, in a country where she did not speak the language, did not know the culture, and did not have her mother down the hall to hug her after a brutal loss. Just sit with that for a second. 13. An age when most kids are stressed about middle school friend groups and homework. Alex Eala was waking up before sunrise, grinding on court against players who had every advantage she did not, communicating in a language that was not her own, chasing something that statistically almost never works out. And for years, honestly, it did not look like it was working. She played the lower rungs of professional tennis. The tournaments that never make television. The ones where you play in front of a few hundred people, sleep in budget hotels, and grind for ranking points that feel like they will never add up to anything real. This is the part of an athlete's story nobody puts in the highlight reel. There is no music playing behind it. There is no crowd cheering. There is just a teenage girl, thousands of miles from her family, trying to prove that the sacrifice was actually worth something. Here is what separates this from a typical underdog story, though. Alex Eala was not only fighting to become good at tennis. She was fighting to prove that a country with zero precedent, zero infrastructure, and zero cultural expectation of ever producing a world-class female tennis player could actually do it anyway. Every loss in those early years was not just personal. It carried this quiet, nagging question underneath it. Was this whole experiment even possible in the first place? If you have ever chased something that everyone around you quietly doubted, You already know exactly what that kind of pressure feels like in your chest. And if that is hitting home right now, that is exactly the kind of story this channel exists to tell. Real athletes carrying real weight that most people never see behind the scenes. So if you want more of these deep dives before the algorithm buries them somewhere you will never find, now is a good time to make sure you are subscribed. Because the next part of this story is where things get genuinely dark. The truth is, before Alex Eala ever made history, she had to survive the most heartbreaking loss of her young career. A loss so close, so painfully near, that it nearly convinced everyone around her, and maybe even Alex Eala herself, that this dream had a hard ceiling on it. So let us go to Miami, 2025. This is the moment everything before it had been quietly building toward, and the moment that almost broke the whole thing apart. Alex Eala shows up at the Miami Open as basically a stranger to the American tennis audience. Low ranking, zero hype, zero expectations attached to her name. And then something happens that nobody in that building saw coming. She starts winning. And not against soft draws either. She takes down seeded player after seeded player, each win chipping away another layer of doubt, each win proving that the 13-year-old who left home for Spain had actually become exactly what she set out to become. By the time she reaches the semifinal, tennis writers who had never once typed her name before are frantically Googling how to pronounce it. She has gone from invisible to impossible to ignore in the span of a single tournament. And standing across the net from her in that semifinal is Jessica Pegula, an American star, a top-ranked player. A genuine, immovable obstacle between Alex Eala and a moment that would have changed her entire career overnight. Here is where it starts to hurt. Alex Eala does not just hang around in that match. She leads. She has Pegula on the ropes, visibly rattled. She gets to one set away, then just a handful of points away, from the single biggest win of her life. Live. In front of an American crowd. Against an American opponent. On American soil. Picture it for a second. Every point pulling her closer. The crowd starting to buzz with that electric, uneasy energy. The commentators shifting their tone the way they always do when they sense an upset unfolding in real time right in front of them. What do you think is running through a 20-year-old's head in that exact moment? When the win of her life is sitting right there in her hands, close enough to grab. And then, point by agonizing point, it slips right through her fingers. Pegula claws her way back into it. The match stretches into a brutal 3-set war. 7, 6, 5, 7, 6, 3. And when the dust finally settles, it is Pegula walking off with the trophy chase intact, and Alex Eala walking off carrying something far heavier than a simple loss. Because here is the thing about losing when you never really had a shot. It stings for a night, sure, but it does not haunt you. This was different. This was a loss with the finish line already in sight. A loss where victory got close enough to touch, and then vanished anyway. Ask any professional athlete which kind of defeat is harder to carry, and almost every single one of them will tell you the same thing. It is this one. The near miss. The one that plays on a loop in your head at 2 in the morning for months afterward. For a 20-year-old carrying the hopes of an entire nation that had never seen a woman reach this level before, a loss like that could have been the moment everything quietly unraveled. It is exactly the kind of setback that ends promising careers, not through one dramatic collapse, but through the slow, invisible erosion of belief that follows a heartbreak like this. How do you walk back onto a practice court the next morning after coming that close and still falling short? How do you convince yourself the dream is still alive when the closest you have ever come to proving it just slipped straight through your hands? Nobody would have blamed Alex Eala if that Miami loss had become the ceiling of her entire career. Plenty of talented young athletes hit a wall exactly like this one and never fully get back the belief they had before it. The kind of belief that lets you swing freely instead of playing scared and tight. And for a while, it genuinely was not clear which direction this was going to go. What nobody watching that day could possibly have predicted is that this exact loss, against this exact opponent, with this exact sickening feeling of victory slipping away, would come back around 1 year later, in a different city, with the stakes raised even higher this time. And on this occasion, the ending would look completely, unrecognizably different. Now here is where the whole story flips upside down, where you start to realize this was never really about one tennis match. It was about who Alex Eala had quietly become in the space between two losses that looked identical on paper but meant something completely different underneath. August 2026. The Mubadala DC Open in Washington. Alex Eala walks into this tournament not as an unknown anymore, but as someone the entire draw now has to game plan around. And she proves it almost immediately. First she takes down Zheng Qinwen, a player who had beaten her before. Then she eliminates Leylah Fernandez, the defending champion of this exact event. Then she knocks out Elina Svitolina, a former top 5 player, and one of the most battle-tested competitors on tour. And in the semi-final, she does something that genuinely stops the tennis world in its tracks. She beats Naomi Osaka, a former world number 1 and 4-time Grand Slam champion, in straight sets, 6-4, 6-2. Run through that list again. 4 completely different playing styles, 4 completely different levels of danger, 4 wins in a row against players who all had every reason in the world to shut her down. This is not luck. This is not one hot week. This is a 21-year-old who has completely rebuilt herself from the ground up since that afternoon in Miami. And waiting for her in the final. Jessica Pegula. Same opponent, same country hosting the match. That same sick feeling in your stomach if you remembered exactly what happened the last time these two shared a court. The tennis world could not have scripted a more painful rematch if it tried. Sunday arrives. The final begins. And almost instantly, the ghost of Miami starts creeping back in. Pegula takes the first set 6-4. Then she pushes ahead early in the second, building a lead, 2-1. Anyone who watched Miami is thinking the exact same terrified thought at the exact same moment. Here we go again. And then the sky just opens up. A storm rolls straight into Washington and play gets suspended. Not for 20 minutes. Not even for an hour. For 20 full hours. 20 hours of nothing but rain, delay updates, and a scoreboard frozen on the worst possible number imaginable for Alex Eala. Pegula ahead. Alex Eala behind. The exact same shape as the collapse that had haunted her for over a year. Just imagine sitting overnight with that scoreline stuck in your head, not able to finish it. Not able to change a single thing about it. Just sitting alone with your own thoughts while a rain delay rips a 14-month-old wound right back open. If you were Alex Eala, what would actually be running through your mind at 3 in the morning, staring at a hotel ceiling, knowing you have to walk back onto that same court in a few hours and finish what Miami never let you finish? Monday arrives. The rain finally clears. And Alex Eala walks back onto Rock Creek Park Tennis Center to complete a match that, on paper, looks like an exact replay of the one that broke her heart back in 2025. Except this time, something in her has clearly shifted. Something that nobody outside her tight inner circle fully understood until this exact moment on court. Because from the second play resumes, Alex Eala does not play like a nervous 20-year-old chasing a dream that keeps slipping through her fingers. She plays like someone who has already made peace with the version of herself that lost in Miami, and is no longer afraid of ever becoming her again. She takes the second set clean. Then something extraordinary happens in the third. She does not just win it. She obliterates it. 6-0. Not a single game surrendered to Pegula in the deciding set of a final this big. 9 of the last 10 games of the entire match belong to Alex Eala. Here is the twist: almost nobody was talking about heading into that final. This was never really a rematch of a tennis match. It was a rematch against a memory. Against a version of herself that once let a lead slip away in front of the entire world. And the story everyone assumed would repeat itself instead became the story of a young woman proving, point by point, that the girl who lost in Miami simply does not exist anymore. But knowing she won the match is not the same as understanding what actually shifted inside her to make a comeback like this possible. And the real proof of that transformation is sitting inside something Jessica Pegula said the moment the match ended. Words that reveal exactly how much Alex Eala has grown since that heartbreak 14 months ago. Right after the match, at the trophy ceremony, Jessica Pegula stood there as the runner-up and said something most losing finalists would never admit out loud in front of cameras. She looked out at the crowd, still buzzing from what they had just witnessed, and told them straight up, "It is not fun to play against, but I do appreciate it." Sit with that for a second. A top 3 player in the world, someone who has already won her own major titles, just admitted on camera that facing Alex Eala and the wall of support behind her is genuinely, physically difficult, not because of one shot or one tactical wrinkle, because of what Alex Eala has built around her game. A following so loud and so relentless that it becomes an actual competitive disadvantage for whoever is standing across the net from her. That was not a throwaway compliment. That was proof of exactly how much had changed since Miami. Back in Miami, Alex Eala was the quiet underdog nobody in the building was even rooting for. In Washington, she had transformed into a player whose mere presence could tilt momentum before a single ball was even struck. And this was not even the first time Pegula had said something like this about her. Before the final ever started, a reporter asked Pegula about facing Alex Eala again, and she called her the future of the tour, adding that she was already here. Think about the timing of that. Pegula said this before she lost. Before the rain delay. Before the 20 hours of waiting around. She looked at a 21-year-old who had beaten her in a heartbreaking three-setter over a year earlier. And instead of brushing her off, she called her the future of the entire sport, out loud, to reporters, days before actually facing her in a final. That is not something you say about a player you expect to steamroll. That is something you say about a player who has already proven she belongs at the very top, whether or not she wins the very next match. Now let us tie this back to where we started. Remember the girl who quietly boarded a flight from Manila at 13 years old with no map and no precedent behind her. Remember the semifinal collapse in Miami that could have ended this whole story right there and then. Every single piece of that long, grinding journey led directly to this trophy ceremony in Washington, where the very opponent who broke her heart a year earlier stood at a microphone and told the entire tennis world that Alex Eala is not just good. She is the future. Here is something most people scrolling through the highlights completely missed. Reporters covering the tournament noted that Filipino fans in the crowd were doing something almost unheard of in tennis etiquette. They were cheering when Pegula missed her serves, not out of disrespect toward Pegula at all, but out of pure, overwhelming devotion to Alex Eala. The kind of devotion that usually only follows athletes decades deep into legendary careers, not 21-year-olds playing their very first tour-level final. And Alex Eala herself, when asked about the wave of support following her everywhere she goes, gave an answer that tells you everything about how she carries this weight. She admitted she sometimes forgets the impact she holds, before adding, almost quietly, "It seems to surprise me every time." That single line closes the loop on everything we have covered so far. This is a young woman who left home at 13 chasing a game, not chasing fame, not chasing a following. The devotion she inspires now was never engineered. It grew naturally out of an entire country watching its first real contender, someone who fell apart in Miami and rose from the ashes in Washington, someone whose own toughest rival just confirmed, in front of every camera in the building, that this is only the beginning. The scoreline reads 4-6, 6-4, 6-0. But the real story, the one Jessica Pegula just confirmed with her own words, is that the version of Alex Eala, who lost in Miami, is completely gone. And what replaced her is someone even her opponents now openly call the future of this sport. So here we are, right back where we started. A 21-year-old, on her knees, hands pressed over her face, crying in front of a stadium that, 14 months earlier, would not have known her name at all. The gap between those two moments was never really about a new serve or a different coach or a tactical fix. It was about a young woman who lost the closest match of her life on American soil, sat with that heartbreak for over a year, and instead of letting it define her, quietly let it rebuild her from the inside out. Miami did not break Alex Eala. It forged the version of her that showed up in Washington unbeatable, in a way nobody, not even the woman standing across the net from her, ever saw coming. And that is what makes this so much bigger than a single trophy. Alex Eala is not just chasing her own career anymore. She is living proof that a country of 118 million people, a country that had never once produced a woman in the top 30 of world tennis, can produce a genuine champion. Every young girl in the Philippines picking up a racket for the first time this week now has something she never had before. A blueprint, a face to look up to. Proof that the distance between where you start and where you can end up is never actually fixed. So the real question is not whether Alex Eala can hang with the biggest names in this sport. Jessica Pegula already answered that one herself, standing at a microphone, in front of the entire tennis world. The real question is how far this story goes from here. With the US Open just weeks away, and a top 20 ranking now within reach for the very first time in her career. If Miami was the heartbreak, and Washington was the redemption, what happens when Alex Eala walks into New York with nothing left to prove and everything still to win? That story is still being written. And if you want to be here when the next chapter drops, this is exactly the kind of moment worth sticking around for. Subscribe now, because the next time Alex Eala steps onto a Grand Slam court, you are going to want to already be watching when it happens.